And as it looks away, the eyes go from red to an amber color to a solid gold when the light hits the side of the eye, and then it's right back at me. This goes on for at least 5 minutes, and I realize it's not moving, I'm not moving, and I've got a spoonful of bacon grease in my hand. My name is Matt Parrish, and for the last 4.5 years, I've had this Bigfoot phenomenon occurring on my property in Quinault, Washington. Up until that point, I was living in East Texas with my family, and where I worked for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 13 years, and I ended up leaving that job with the rank of lieutenant. We had been coming to Washington for years for vacation, and in 2018, we had a very unique experience on Lake Crescent. It was October 30th. It was actually, we were there for my birthday weekend, and we were just getting ready for bed. It was around 11 o'clock at night. It was your typical Pacific Northwest, the gloomy, rainy weather outside all day. We'd been hiking through the rainforest. We were tired. And at 11 o'clock, we were laying down. And as we were laying down, we got the classic, what sounded like a whoop, like kind of like an Ohio howl. What we later would learn was an Ohio howl. And so, yeah, that really sparked my interest. Me and my wife looked at one another, and I was like, there's no way we just heard what we thought we heard. And so I told her, I said, we got to come back. And so, yeah, that was my first real experience with Bigfoot. Growing up, of course, I heard the stories. My father would tell us things. My grandfather would tell me things. I always thought it was kind of like a fairy tale, kind of a boogeyman type, just to keep kids out of the woods. It wasn't until I was in the first grade when I saw the classic Patterson film, and I realized that, wow, this thing could exist. There's something now in front of me that I can see that's not like a leprechaun, not like unicorns. There's something out there leaving footprints, leaving circumstantial evidence for people to find. And so that really intrigued me. So I was always kind of fascinated growing up over the years. But it wasn't until that incident at Lake Crescent that really piqued my interest, and I had to know more. And so in 2021, when me and my family had the opportunity to move here to Washington State, it was a no-brainer. I love the outdoors. My girls love the outdoors. So that's what we did. We had a fire sale on all of our property. Everybody thought we were completely mad and insane, and loaded up what we could into the Blazer, and off we set for Washington. And we ended up eventually finding a place in Lake Quinault here in Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula. And so Quinault it's a really beautiful place if you've never ever been there. It's the Quinault rainforest, home to the Quinault Nation, the Quinault people. And I have dealt with many tribes throughout the Pacific Northwest, and the Quinault people, not saying anything about the other tribes, but the Quinault people really embraced me and my family, and we were actually allowed to live on tribal land in the Quinault reservation. And so it was a really unique experience for me and my wife, and then, of course, raising our oldest daughter. The little one had not come along yet. That first year, I started working at the lodge there on the lake, and we got a house that they had provided for us. And then they said, well, we're not going to provide housing anymore. And so we ended up having to take over from the lease from the landlord, which was totally fine. And now my job wasn't dependent on housing anymore. And so we had a place that was safe, it was secure, and we started noticing weird stuff after about three to 4 months of moving in there. The first thing that we noticed was around 11 to 2 at night, we would experience this strange odor, this not really an overpowering stench, but just kind of a gamey odor would drift into the house at night. And so my wife worried that it might be like a bear or something like that. I went out and got floodlights, and I would put floodlights up around the house. And I would be sitting in my recliner at 11 o'clock at night when that smell would start to drift in, and I could see the floodlights pop off. And so I would jump up and run to the window, hoping to see a bear or something, but there would be nothing there ever. And so that was the first year. We would lay in bed, and the house next door to us, which was literally maybe 15 feet, this whole area was kind of abandoned. Like I said, the lodge decided that they weren't going to provide housing anymore for their employees, so most of the employees packed up because they were seasonal employees and they didn't want to, take over a lease because they didn't have long-term plans like we did. While we're there, we're in this subdivision pretty much by ourselves, and the house next to us was abandoned, and we would hear at nighttime what sounded like banging on the roof next to us. And so we could never really, we'd get up and we'd look and there'd be nothing there. And I told my wife, I said, well, maybe they left trash in the house or something like that. And it's just wildlife trying to get in to get after some rotten trash or something. So, and that was pretty much it. That first year, there was nothing more that really eventful that took place. Except for one thing. In December, my wife found out that she was pregnant. And so now the pressure's on because this is only a 2-bedroom house. We need a 3-bedroom house. The house next door to us was vacant, and it was 3-bedroom. And to be honest with you, I would have burned that house to the ground if I could have, because it had been so trashed out, and it had been vacant for so long, it needed a lot of work. We ended up moving in there and fixing it up. We spent a week really making it nice, and we put a lot of effort into that house. And my parents decided that they were going to come up that first week that we were in there. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is great. Here we are, a baby house, and now we got to be hostess on top of it. But and I was expecting to have a nicer house for my parents to see. But so they come. We have a great time. That very first night, we're doing a seafood gumbo. My wife and I, being from East Texas, we were craving some good Tex-Mex, some Cajun food, and my wife wanted the seafood gumbo. So my stepmom, she started making it because she's an excellent cook. And so we sit out on the porch. We have our seafood gumbo, and we're having a good time. This is the end of June. And around 11 o'clock, we decided to call it quits for the night because we're going to get up the next morning and take my parents out and show them the sights around the peninsula, show them the beaches and the rainforest and everything else that it has to offer. So we lay down, and they take our bedroom. Of course, naturally, that's what we do. And it also had a brand new window unit, an air conditioning unit that we had placed in there. So it was a little more comfortable for them, especially being from the South. They're used to air conditioning. And we took my daughter's room, which was right next door, and we just left the window open because it was just fine with us. It wasn't hot at all. So we're sleeping, and around 2 o'clock in the morning, my wife wakes me up, and she tells me, she says, Matthew, she says, there's something outside banging around. And I said, yeah. I said, there's a lot of stuff outside banging around. It's a rainforest. And she looks at me and she's like, no. She's like, there's someone or something outside the house. And I said, yeah, I imagine there would be. Probably a bear, probably elk, who knows? So I'm kind of a little perturbed that she woke me up. And I'm starting to lay back down and go back to sleep. And I heard a whistle right at the window. And this was a very clear, distinct whistle. This was not like a bird whistle at all. So now I'm awake, I'm listening, and I'm trying to strain my ears. If this is someone outside my house, I don't want them to know that I'm awake yet. I would like to have the element of surprise if it is a person. So I'm laying there and I'm listening. Then I can hear what sounds like footsteps walking away from the house. And I'm struggling. They're getting further away. I lay there a little bit longer and I don't hear anything else. It just goes dead silent. And so after about 45 minutes, I nodded back off to sleep. After I went back to sleep, nothing else eventful happened. It was fairly peaceful night the rest of the night. I get up the next morning. I go outside. My father, who just retired, at the time he was still working for the Livingston Police Department in East Texas. He's the chief of police there. That's a career that he did for 40 years, and he just recently retired from there this past summer. He's out there on the porch, and I can see that he is visibly bothered by something. And so I asked him, I said, how'd you sleep last night? And he goes, well, he said, let's talk about that for a minute, son. And I said, he said, well, wait. He said, well, first of all, how did you and your wife sleep? Y'all weren't in your bed. You were in your daughter's bed. How did y'all sleep? I said, we slept pretty decent. I said, you know what? I said, this thing did happen at 2:00. And when I mentioned that, he really perked up. And he's like, what happened? And I told him, and he looks over at my stepmother and he goes, yeah, that's around the same time that, we had our thing happen. And I said, what happened to y'all? And he said, someone or something came up to your window unit and started banging on it very aggressively. And so I asked him, I said, have you been around the corner yet? He's like, no, we just walked outside. We just got up, shortly before. And so I said, okay. I said, well, let's go around the corner. So we go around the corner. As we come off the porch and we're walking around to the corner of the property, the first thing I noticed that was coming from the road was that there were these impressions in the grass. They measured anywhere from 16 to 17 inches. They were just impressions. They weren't definitive tracks, not toes and heels, nothing like that, just impressions. But they were about 2.5 to 3 feet apart and one directly in front of the other. And they came up along the tree line and they went up to where my bedroom window was, where they were staying. And where that AC unit is, there was a rock, a river stone, that was sitting right on top of that AC unit. And so you could even see in the ground where it had been plucked, because there was an indention, because it had been embedded into the soil a little bit. And so something had picked that up and used that to bang on that window unit and then just left it there. And then it comes back, the impressions circle back up the side of the house to where me and my wife were, and it was standing right there at that window. And then it turns around, makes another circle, goes back to the other window with the window unit along the back side of the house and then up the other side. And it takes its forearm, it looks like it took its forearm and placed over a window where we had the garbage on the opposite side of the house. And so there's a bunch of shrimp peelings and everything like that from the night before that were still in that garbage. But we could see strands of hair in that impression on the window. And it wasn't an oily, it wasn't a greasy, it was just like wet hair that had been pressed up on the window in the shape of a forearm and dried in the morning sun. And so then the impressions continued back on down to the road where we lost them. And that's when it occurred to me, I've heard my neighbors tell stories. I've heard stories locally about these things. The natives there call them the Siatco, the shy people. Why not? It only was a matter of time before we would have our own experiences on our property. And so the rest of the week goes by. No more events. It was pretty quiet, uneventful. They leave, 3 days go by. On the third day, I get up around 10 o'clock. We're all kind of settling in for the night, getting ready for bed. I get up and I go to the kitchen to get a drink of water. And in the kitchen, like I said, this had been a party house, and so for seasonal workers. And the kitchen window had been busted out, and so I had placed a piece of cardboard up over it. In the meantime, while we were waiting on the new window to be that we had ordered to come in. So while I'm waiting on that, I got this cardboard up that I taped this adhesive, packaging tape around to keep the weather out. As I go in there and I'm getting this drink of water, that thing starts flexing in and out. Like something on the other side is pushing on it, and I can hear the adhesive peeling away from the wall, from the windowsill, as it's pushing, and then it would let go, and it would push, and it would let go. And this was almost rhythmic. This wasn't like wind, like something flapping. There was no storm. This is July now. We've moved into the early part of July, and it's nice and it's dry weather outside. So I'm sitting there, I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, how quick can I get to my gun if this thing is trying to come in the house, whatever is on the other side? And around that time, my daughter comes running out of her room, and she runs up to me, and she goes, "I know you're trying to sneak on me." And I said, "Do what?" And she goes, "I know you're trying to sneak on me." I said, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, and I look back over at the window, and it's stopped. It's not moving no more. It's just still. And I said, "What are you?" And she goes, "You're outside my bedroom window talking." And I said, "No, I wasn't." I said, "I've been standing right here the whole time." And she goes, "Yeah, you were out there trying to sound like a Chinese zombie." And I don't mean anything by that, but her interpretation was that it sounded Asian and that it also sounded like a zombie. So to clarify that, but that was her perception of it. And that's when I realized there must be two of these things. What I first thought was just a single individual coming around my house. I no longer thought that. I thought, okay, I have a couple of them now. And so we very quickly established some ground rules with our daughter, and told her at nighttime she's to keep her window closed at all times. As it's getting close to dark, she needs to close her blinds and cover her window, and et cetera, et cetera. When you go outside to play, you play while you're being supervised. You don't just go outside on your own, and the tree line is off limits completely. We established those ground rules with her and told her that she needed to let us know any time in the future that these things try to communicate, and don't attempt to communicate back. Because at the time, we really didn't know what we were dealing with. We didn't know if they were dangerous or if they, were friendly. You just didn't know. I tell my wife, after that incident, I said, we got to try to catch this thing on film. We got to try to get a video of this. I said, do we still have the Ring camera that we used, our doorbell camera from Texas? And she goes, yeah. And she goes, how are you going to use that? I was like, well, it doesn't mount to anything. I mean, you can mount it wherever you want. And it's battery operated. And she's like, oh, okay, so we dig it out of storage, and I set it up, and I put it on the porch railing facing the tree line where these things have been coming and going from the property. And so the first night, I got all kinds of stuff on there, all kinds of hits, and I ended up having to change the settings to where it was just for a person only. It would only go off if something large passed in front of it. 2 more nights go by, and then around 3:01 in the morning when I was getting ready for work, my phone sent me a notification from my Ring system saying that a person had just crossed in front of the camera. And I didn't think anything of it at the time because I was like, I'm awake. I would have heard, something outside. I set it down. Around 3:40, I had finished getting ready for work, and I was fixing to walk out the door. I said, I'm going to look at this film real quick. And I look, and I can see what looks like a Sasquatch coming around the corner of my house. Just 40 minutes prior to me going to work, 40 minutes prior to me fixing to walk out the door, and it walks up along the wall, and it's like doing something to the side of the wall. I interpret that it was probably picking bugs or grub, maybe trying to eat them. I don't know. But when it gets within about 20, 25 feet of the camera, it stops, it looks right at the camera, and then it turns around and walks off. And I sent that video to a police department to actually be cleaned up to see if we could get a better image, because at that time it was, with the Ring night vision, it's not that great. And they sent back, when they sent back their analysis and their cleanup of it, that was, wow. You know you have this thing coming around your house, but you're not really sure if you're willing to fully, buy the product yet, so to speak. And when that came back and we could see that face looking back at the camera, that was it. We knew what we were dealing with. And over the course of the 4.5 years, we continued to have reoccurring visits. There was no specific pattern to the visits. There was no, okay, they come this time. So trying to film them again was extremely difficult. But I immediately upgraded my security system. I went out and spent over $1,000 in Blink home security. The problem with that is where we live is so remote and so rural in Quinault that the Wi-Fi is horrible, so there's a delay. I would constantly get this pattern where something would pass through the property and these cameras would pop off in sequence, but when you go back and look, there'd be nothing there. So that was the issue, and I found that, when I tested it myself, I would go and walk through the property. We set up 10 cameras, and that was the headache that I had with that. But I started talking to other researchers. I started reaching out to people for help, for ideas. And it was actually through this program that I learned about Mel Scahan. And he was one of the very first people that I reached out to for advice on how to deal with these things. And so he suggested that we started gifting. And so he also suggested that I stop trying to trick them with the cameras, and I get rid of the technology and just be myself, be natural, invite them and let them know me and my family. So I was actually able to convince my wife to keep the kitchen window uncovered, so that way at nighttime they could see part of our life, not our whole life, but if they were outside, they would be able to see and view what we were doing. And they would feel safe doing that because we wouldn't be able to see out there and see them in the dark. And so that was one of the things that we did on top of the gifting. And I tried several different things. In the beginning, I would try everything from peanut butter in a jar, hoping to get fingerprints. That never worked. I would try different fruits. Some of that never worked. But when I switched to more organic things and got away from the processed stuff, that's when we started seeing results. I would leave out 10 plums at a time on my gifting table on the side of the house that was closest to the tree line where they traveled the most. And consistently, they would leave 4 behind every time that I would leave out the plums. The other thing was I would leave out fresh corn for them, and they would take the corn and they would husk it. They would husk the corn. The corn wasn't shredded. It wasn't ripped apart. It wasn't chewed up. It was just as if you or I was husking the corn and getting it ready to cook. But there'd be this big pile of corn leaves outside anytime that we would do that. And so one night I go out and I kept the same routine. I do the same thing every time. Even if I was out fixing to do yard work or something, I would go to the tree line and I would just tell them, I'd say, hey, look guys, I'm fixing to start weeding, I'm fixing to start mowing, I'm doing my thing. and I would never have any problem. But I kept the same routine with gifting. And when I would go out there, I would often show them what I'm, before I set it down. Not that I feel like they understand or speak English, but I'm more or less projecting my demeanor, and showing them that I'm not a threat. I'm not here to harm you. I'm just here to have an experience, and I want to learn. And so this one particular night, last October, I went outside, and when I went out there, this tree in the corner of the property fell over, and there was no wind, there's nothing happening. So I walk over there, because sometimes trees just happen to fall. I'm sorry, that it's not always Bigfoot. But I happened to walk over there just in case, because I'm like, that is kind of weird. There's no wind. And I'm looking, and I'm searching, I'm listening, and I'm trying to smell, and I'm getting nothing. So then I pull the stuff out of my bag, and I start showing it. And I'm like, okay, I brought you this tonight. I got you guys some plums. I got you some bacon grease, a jar of bacon grease that we had been saving up. And then I go back, and I begin to put my gifts out on the table that I had. And then that's when I hear just this big, massive something coming up behind me. And I take my headlamp, and I look over my shoulder. And when I look behind me over my shoulder, I'm being looked back at by two big red eyes. And my heart just sank, because it wasn't that far of a distance. This was the first time being outside of the house that these things had made their presence known in a way to where I could see them, where I could look them back in the eye. And so that was a very unique experience. Our whole experience changed that night. Everything changed, because now they feel more comfortable to be a little more exposed, I guess. And so I'm standing there, and while I'm looking at this thing, I remember I got my phone and I'm recording. So I recorded all of this interaction. And while I'm watching it, something over in the corner of the property where the tree had fell began busting up branches and tearing up stuff. And I remember that these things often operate in groups of 2 or more. And so a lot of times throughout the course of the 4 years, when you would start to get close to one, or you thought you were having experience with one, something would start to happen over here that would take your attention away from that one. They never seem to like us knowing, even from inside the house peering out, they never seemed to like us knowing exactly where they were. They would do things to kind of throw us off a little bit while they did their thing and got away. This thing over here is tearing up the brush, and one of the things that I learned about my law enforcement career back in Texas was that the person being the loudest is the person I need to worry about the least. And so but I know he's there. And this thing, I'm looking at it, it's looking back at me, and occasionally it looks over to where, the other one is making all this ruckus. And as it looks away, the eyes go from red to an amber color to a solid gold when the light hits the side of the eye, and then it's right back at me. This goes on for at least 5 minutes, and I realize it's not moving, I'm not moving, and I've got a spoonful of bacon grease in my hand. And now I'm in between it and its food. And so I thought, this is not a place I really want to be right now. And so I ended up setting the stuff down, and I decided to leave. I was like, okay, you can do your thing. I'm out of here. I get to the corner of my house, and I look over my shoulder one more time, and to the corner of my house from where I was standing was maybe 10 feet. It wasn't very far. I look behind me, and now this thing is only about 15 feet away from me, and it's peeking out from behind a tree. And I can see the eyes, I can see the silhouette of the head, I can see the shoulder, and what appears to be an arm in the hand as it's hugging this tree, this big fir tree, looking out at me. And it's only about 15 feet away. The crazy thing was I never heard it move through the forest. I never heard it move as it closed that distance. And so that's when I booked it. I just, I got out of there. I skedaddled. I hauled tail into the house fast. And I ran in the house, and my wife's like, "What happened to you?" And I'm huffing and puffing, and I was like, it's out there right now, you know? And she was like, wow, that was just, it blew her mind away. So, like I said, that event really changed things a lot, kind of escalated things on the property. Not in a harmful way. These things, I just want to clarify that, you know, in the beginning, yes, it was scary. Like I said, we didn't know what we were dealing with. But as time went on and the visits came, I learned that if these things meant harm, they could have definitely done harm. I was out there alone many times going to work at 3 a.m, walking to my truck, and they could have got me. My girls were home alone sometimes after I would go to work, and it was just them. And if they wanted to do something, they definitely could have, but they never did. We would lay in bed at night, and like I said, we had that window unit where in the room, in our bedroom, and on each side of the window unit, you have this the stretchy plastic thing, you know, to kind of help fill the gap, to keep the weather out. And so at nighttime, around 2 a.m, often we would start to hear what sounded like fingernails or something running along that plastic. And so that was really, I would lay there and my wife would be like, "Are you hearing this?" I'm like, "Yeah, but what do you want to do about it?" You know, you saw the video, I saw the same. What are we going to do? And she was 8 months pregnant at this point, and she goes, I've had enough. I can't sleep. It's hot. And it's racking its fingers across. Well, now it's starting to push that piece in. Like, I think it was just amused with the sound of the plastic, but it popped it out, and she said, "You better do something." And I said, I'm not doing nothing. It's 10 foot tall, and I don't think I have a weapon in this house that would be able to do anything anyways. She throws off the blanket, she jumps up, and she goes over to the window, and she throws open the window, and she says, "Da da 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 da," you know, and she yells some obscenities, and then next thing I know, this woman who I've seen always scared my whole life, not scared, but a timid, shy, quiet woman, she hauls off. And I said, "Where are you going?" She's like, "I see it. It's going to the next room." So she runs into the next room, throws it up. "You keep going. You get off this property." Da 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 da. I'm like, ay. And so I said, "Well, that's great. You just pissed it off. We'll probably never see it again." And because I was actually amused by our interactions. I enjoyed it, you know, because it kind of validated that there is something out there. There's something happening that's real, and I wanted to know more. And we have a very unique opportunity, and we're very blessed. Where I live, I don't think that these things were visiting us because we're special. We just happened to be in a special location. We lived at the mouth of the Quinault River, and there's a salmon hatchery right there. And then right across the street in my front yard, there's freshwater clams from the lake. We have elk that would always come up in our backyard, elk that were all throughout the woods around our house, deer. We were plopped down right in the middle of a buffet for them. And then we were the only ones with children on top of that. We were the only ones with a daughter. There are a lot of houses around the lake, but there's only about maybe 30 people that live out there year round. If you look at it, it'll say 190 something residents, but most of those are Airbnbs or vacation spots. The rest of the year, it's just the 30 of us. And then in my particular spot, there was only about 6 or 7 of us that live there year round. So It's a very isolated community. It's except for summertime. Summertime we're slam jam full. You'd think it's Disney World, but besides those 3 months, there's nobody there. It's quiet. So yeah, we had that happen, and these things, they just continued to escalate over the period of the 4.5 years that we were there. There's one event I didn't tell you that I could tell you on camera. I go into that now.
Yeah.
So one night, while we had an open floor plan in the house for the most part. It was kind of an L-shaped. And so I'm sitting by the front door, and if I'm sitting by the front door, I can look straight into my kitchen, and I can look to my right, and I can see the entire living room, and the TV would be right here in the corner. So I'm sitting there, and I'm watching TV, and my daughter is in the kitchen. She's doing her dishes as part of her nightly chore, and the kitchen window is in front of her. And at this point, the kitchen window had been replaced. And like I said, I convinced my wife to allow us to keep the one window uncovered or unobstructed, no blinds, no nothing. So that way these things could learn that we're not a threat. And I look in there, and I look over at my daughter, and normally this window is, at nighttime, it is a black glossy shine on it. You can't see anything out of it. It's just pure blackness. And so I look over at her, and I'm not sure what, but I have a feeling, I'm like, something's not right. Like when you have a roommate or a spouse and you go in and they move something in your house, but you just don't quite know what it is that they did, but something's different. And so that's the feeling that I was having when I was looking at her. And I kept looking at the window, and I was like, something's not right. I can't place it. So I told her, I said, hey, love, I said, if you want to stop doing your dishes and you want to go, I'll finish them up for you. And so she, like any typical kid getting out of their chores, she was happy as could be. She started bouncing off, oh, yeah, cool, And so the minute she did that, the window, while she was standing there, it was a smoky gray color. The whole window was. But as she turned around and left, something outside had moved away from the window, and it went back to that black glossy shine. And so I was like, whatever this was, it took up the entire window. And that window was about 5 feet tall and about 4 feet wide, and it was about 6 feet off the ground. So whatever was out there was considerably large. And around 2 a.m, a lot of our stuff happened about 2, roughly. May have been 1:30, but right around that time frame, early morning, we were all woken up because something had impacted the backside of the house where I was sleeping, and it was loud, and it just shook the house. And so the next morning I get up and I go outside, and I find about 12 feet away, I find a set of tracks where in front of the kitchen window where my daughter had been doing her dishes. And so that kind of reaffirmed that, yeah, this thing was standing right outside the window about 12 feet away, and that's why it caused that smoky gray look. But when I went a little bit further down the backside of the house to try to figure out what impacted it, I had the side of the house has shingles on it, wooden shingles, and one of the wooden shingles was busted, and there was a rock, a good size, tennis ball sized rock that had impacted the back of the house where that shingle was busted. What was interesting was it was right where my head was, where I sleep, and in the bed. And so I was like, okay, I took away his entertainment. He got mad, threw a rock, and busted the shingle, or she, whichever individual it was out there. But over the course of this 4.5 years, we had 3 different sets of tracks show up on the property, and The one most frequent that would appear was a 15-inch track. And that's the night that I told you when I went out to feed and it was looking back at me and I was looking at it. The next morning, I had actually went outside and went back down in there just to see what I could find. And I actually found a 15-inch track with toes and everything, and it was pretty incredible. And once you get down into that area also, it's kind of a boggy marsh area, so there's no trees or anything right there. And measuring the video, because it kind of drops down, we actually did a reenactment with a group that came out to look at it, and we determined that the height of the creature in the video based off the eye shine and where it was at was roughly around 7.5 feet, give or take. From my 4.5-year experience, one thing that I would tell people if they encounter these things is to have an open mind. There are going to be a lot of things that you don't understand. Just accept it. You will beat yourself to death if you try to ask yourself why. Why me? Why this? Why do they do this? Accept it. Have an open mind. Be receptive. Understand that I don't believe that they're here to harm us. If they were, they could. That being said, you still don't know what it is, so I would use caution in how you interact with these things. But yeah, just that's the main thing. Just have an open mind. And to anybody who's a skeptic of these things, because I used to hear similar stories like mine, and I would tell my wife, I'd be like, those people are nuts, You just got to get off the couch. You got to get out there. You got to go look for yourself. It's out there. You can find it if you want. If I could do it, anybody can do it.